Hi, it's Jory with Tatelin Studio. Welcome back to another episode, and in today's video I will be building this mid-century modern bench. Now this bench is made out of walnut, and I'm just starting off here by wiping off the boards. They were quite dirty. They must have been sitting in the bottom of the pile at my supplier, but I'm just flipping the boards over and trying to find the best grain structure for that upper bench surface. Now I am just sort of measuring them out here, and I end up cutting them just a little over 6 feet. I think I brought it in at about 6 inches longer, so then when the boards were all done I could cut off the defects off the end. Sometimes there's tooling marks from the planer, or there's some small checking and stuff. But those offcut pieces, I did end up using them for the leg. Now before I ran them through the jointer, you could see that I just pulled those staples off the edge. I didn't want to chip my blades. And once I do run those boards through the jointer, I start off with the face and then I move over to the edge. Now when it comes to the planing process, I like to run one board through, and then I move on to the next board, and then finally that last board. And then once I've done that last board, I can increase the depth of cut so that as I run those boards sequentially, they all end up being the same thickness. And once all those boards are milled down, I take them over to the table saw and do the final edge cut off there. Now, I do like to use dominoes to connect my boards together. I find that it just helps with alignment and keeps them all nice and flat. So when it does come to the sanding process, I don't have to be sanding off a ridge of, say, a 1/16 of an inch if the boards end up slipping up and down. And for the glue up, I do like to use the Type Bond dark wood glue. I find it works really good for walnut, just in case if there is a little bit of a glue line, you won't see it with the regular colored glue. Now, I'm just kind of banging them together here, and I got my clamps set up. And I like to set those clamps about every 12 inches apart for this size of boards. And once that glue is dried, I take them out of the clamps, and I just trim off the edge on the table saw. Now, normally I don't have this much excess, but I think somehow I thought that the bench width was 18 inches, which was supposed to be the height. But I just trimmed off each edge so it would be a same width board on each end. And I just do a rough sanding at about 60 grit, and then I just cut the edge off on with the track saw. And then I did want to do a bit of a bevel on the bottom, as you can see, and I just used my track saw, and then I ran over the edge with the router. So finally I'm moving on to the leg pieces here. So those legs were just a little over 16 inches tall, and I just run them through the jointer and then switch over to the planer there. Now once all of those boards are ran through the jointer, I just bring my template over for the leg pieces. Now I'm just sort of marking them out here just so I know what the grain will look like, and just sort of marking them out. And then once I mark them out, I just bring them over to the bandsaw, and I'm just sort of rough cutting them here. And then what I end up doing is I set the miter saw to 15 degrees, and I just do that first cut. And then once I do that, I just sort of set up a stop block with some C8 glue on my miter saw, so then when I do cut the legs, they will all be the same length. And then I cut it at that same 15-degree angle so it sits nice and level. And then so I have this little sled on the table saw that I just attach that leg to cut that final side. And essentially I just set it at an angle and I push it through, and then all those legs end up being the same dimension. And then here I'm just cutting the piece for the short skirt that's connecting those legs together along the short end. And I'm just sort of trying to figure out the angle to make sure it's properly. I'm just slowly adjusting my blade, sort of moving it back a little bit to try to get that perfect 15-degree angle. And once I get that all set, I finally run those boards through, and I'm just sort of checking it out, making sure they're working. And I just sort of creep up on that and just slowly take off a little bit out of a time. And then finally I get it set right, and it's really good. Now after I do that, I'm cutting those pieces to length, and I just bring out my miter crosscut sled and I just cut it, and I do both of those sides there. I think the overall width of those legs was about 13 inches, so I just had about 1.5 inches overhang of that bench top. Now here again, I'm just doing the joinery on the domino, and that's the long skirt there. You can see I'm putting the groove in, and I ended up just putting a few dominoes in there, and I wanted to have as large ones as I can. Now here what I'm doing is I'm actually just setting out that slight tapering in the middle of that skirt. So I'm just using some CA glue and applying some plywood. So what I'm going to do is then just use a router to flush trim those pieces. But before I do that, I'm just doing the rough cut on the bandsaw, just so the router bit doesn't have to work quite as much. But you can see I got that flush trim bit, and the bearing is just following that piece of plywood, and it's just cutting it the length there. Now off camera I did end up sanding those down to 180 grit, and then I did a round over on those. And I like to do that before I do the glue up. But yeah, I'm just applying the glue here and just making sure I get it into those into the slots for the tenons really well, because that will be the strength of the connection. So I want to make sure I apply lots of glue in there. And you can see me, I'm attaching the leg here, and if you probably noticed that, oh no, I didn't put it in right, that's the wrong way. And I go over to the other side to put it in, and I do the same. I put it at the wrong angle. I'm like, wait, what's going on here? So it's kind of a bit comical, but I finally flip it over, and you can see I attach it properly on both sides. Now when I clamped them up, I did have a little bit of a cutoff there from when I did cut that long skirt, so I was able to put that between the clamps and the edge of the leg so it could be a nice flat glue up. And it was pretty simple after that. I just used a bunch of baby wipes and just got all that glue out. So finally, once those are glued up, and they're dry, I pull them out of the clamps, and I'm just attaching the domino to the short skirt piece. Now once I've gotten that done, I'm just applying the glue to the tenons as I did before. And again, I'm just making sure I evenly apply that glue on the inside. And then I can just, just take my time sort of putting all that glue in. But I'm trying not to put glue on the face of it, because I don't want those that glue to squeeze out, because what happens is when that glue does squeeze out, and if it's not sanded off properly, which can be very difficult when it's tight joints like that, there ends up being this sort of weird blotchy glue mark, and visually it's really not appealing. So I really make sure that I take my time wiping all that glue out, and every time I tighten those clamps, a little bit of glue will squeeze out, so I just get in there really well. Now sometimes I do use a toothbrush with some water on it, but this time I was able to get in there quite easily with the wet wipe. But finally I'm just moving on to the finishing process. Now you can see that I'm using some dark walnut Danish oil. Now it does darken up the wood a little bit, but one of the nice things that it does do is that it sort of evens out the color of the wood if there is some variation in there. So if there's some boards with a little bit different color, they don't look quite as dramatically different. And I do both the top and the legs, and then once I've done that, I actually do use an Osmo matte finish on it, and I put 2 coats over top of that Danish oil. And then once it's all said and done, it just turned out gorgeous. Now this customer was really happy. It's a front entryway bench for him, but you can see that nice sheen of the matte, and the grain is just gorgeous there, and there's got some figure in the edge of the wood, but it's just beautiful, and I was super happy how it turned out. That pretty much wraps up today's video. I appreciate you watching it to the end, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel. It helps a lot. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video. Take care. Bye.